I bring to you not only the Emerson of our day, but the hardest working intellectual of our time, the funkiest black man on the planet, Cornel West.
Oh, that's so very beautiful. My dear brother, Eddie Glaude just recently selected the William S. Dodd Professor of Religion. Still under 30. It's still in his 30s. Where'd he go? There he is. Brother, I appreciate those kind, generous words. But I also want to salute Professor Daphne Brooks. My God, your vision has been executed at such high quality that all of us revel in your achievement. But you kept the focus where it belongs. It's not just on James Brown and his genius, but on the music. And by focusing on the music, you focus on the people, community, tradition, or struggle that allowed that music to come forth. So I know they just giving you a standing ovation. I just say, I thank you, thank you, thank you. I know others worked with you as well. I know there's Professor No Leeway Rooks is out there, and Sister Carla Ben is out there, and of course I'm always acknowledge Sister Marianne Rodriguez and all the folk there in Stanhope that work so very hard. Let's again give all of them a hand, but especially Daphne, and so many others. And the idea of having such a high quality group of artists and scholars on these various panels, today to me has just been so uplifting and enhancing. I was sorry I missed Farrah Griffin, one of the towering intellectuals of our day, last night. Last night I was actually at the Apollo introducing Obama. He came to Harlem. Actually, I introduced Chris Rock right before. That was a surprise guest. And there's no accident that when Obama actually finished his speech, they played James Brown, Living in America, a song I'm not really crazy about, but it was nice to have James Brown represented in the Apollo, even at the Obama gathering. But today as well, I mean, these discussions just stretch me. And as an older brother, 54 years old, part of the Curtis Mayfield Motown Stax generation, just to see the young minds moving in such a way, trying to keep track of the complexity of James's art and the complicated character of his life, I cannot but leave unsettled. And that's what I always want when I come to a conference. You see, I don't want just celebration. I want critical interrogation. I want to be unsettled. I want to be unhoused. I want to be unnerved in some way so I can actually grow and mature and so forth. But when I walked in, first thing this morning, I saw the one and only Fred Wesley as he's walking down the way. I said, my God, been listening to you for decades, brother. Seen you on stage a zillion times. And he's walking out, he asked about my Cadillac. I said, yeah, my black Cadillac's in good shape, my brother. 21 years old still. That car's still in good shape. I said, how do you hear about my Cadillac? Word and got out. But then later on I saw my dear brother Alice, Pee Wee Alice, another towering figure. Let's give them both a hand. Two foundational figures, artists, not just working with James, but like the best of a jazz quartet, fusing their creativity, allowing their sophisticated voices to bounce off against one another, mediated with respect in such a way that it could deal with the unpredictable precisely because they're so disciplined. That's what was going on with James's band. And that's what I received as a very young brother. See Questlove in the flesh, seen him on stage as well. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. I mean, brother, definitely. And you got Chuck D sitting over there trying to be quiet. But we know we got a giant in the house with this brother right here. We know we got a giant in the house with this brother. And you heard the various references to Public Enemy. And the very fact that you have such a, not just a creative artist and genius, but a freedom fighter as artists in the space makes such a big difference. And then critics like Davy D, who's been struggling, fighting this battle so very well against the waves, given the corporate monopoly of the waves that he was alluding to earlier, how difficult it is to get some oppositional voices in this regard. It's good to have yourself and Tavis Smiley and Amy Goodman and others trying to create spaces in this regard. And I could go on and on and on, but I do want to say a few words about James Brown. And Brother Eddie is so very, very right that, see, as someone who comes to James Brown 54 years ago, I first heard him when I was 7 years old. That was 1960, and it was Please, Please, Please. And I was not that impressed because I already had heard Curtis Mayfield sing. And I said, the brother's got a strong sense of expressing himself, but I prefer Curtis at the moment. Gypsy Woman had already hit me. Now, I'm 7 years old, so this is not the most sophisticated aesthetic judgment now, y'all. But Gypsy Woman, I'm so proud, it already got my heart more than Please, Please. But I must say this, that by the July of 1964, when Out of Sight hit, and then July 67, when Papa's Got a Brand New Bag hit, and then July 1965 was Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. 67, I had a BCAD experience. There was a fissure in my life, and that's when Cold Sweat hit. And see, I've heard Cold Sweat, well, many black folk heard Cold Sweat, which was on the dance floor. It was the rites and the rituals of young black folk trying to come to terms with not just their libido, but their humanity and how they not only relate to the sisters, but also relate to their sense of sanity and dignity. And when you heard that on the dance floor, you said to yourself, something is taking place and it's a breakthrough. It's so funky that it's so radically different. Dyke and the Blazers ain't got nothing on this. This is new. And that was very important indeed. Why was that so very important? Because like so many young folk, especially young black folk today, who are concerned with being copies rather than originals, who are concerned with being an echo rather than a vision, or who are obsessed with being a professional rather than actually having a vocation and a calling. It was clear you couldn't produce Cold Sweat if all you had was a dedication to your profession, or if you were obsessed with your career as opposed to calling, or if you actually were producing, instead of a rich vision that empowers, a cold stare that sterilizes. Never confuse a vision with a stare. The stare is he or she who's a copy. It was clear when Cold Sweat hit, something radically new was taking place. And it was not a one-time affair. Because by the time Cold Sweat hit, and there is a time, and I got the feeling, and we can go on and on and on. I was glad you mentioned escapism, because you didn't need the words. The meaning oftentimes was in the music itself. And yeah, Hot Pants was not the most feminist vision, but it was good in terms of how it's... We just needed to critically interrogate ourselves vis-a-vis our sisters' bodies and desires and libidos, and most importantly, their humanity. But what I've come to say today is that James Brown, like any great artist, was fundamentally wrestling with not just what it means to be human, but he was wrestling with the various forms of death. And there's a sense in which there's a profound death obsession in his life and in his work. You say, well, Brother West, what are you talking about? He seemed to be cheerful all the time. Yes. Oftentimes, those who are most cheerful in disposition are most sad in their souls. One thinks of Chekhov here. One thinks of Tennessee with his copy of Shakespeare's Cymbeline in the coffin. And when you look at James Joe Brown Jr., look at his life. You all know he was born a stillborn baby. Just like Thomas Hardy, the greatest poet novelist in the English language, born stillborn. When they went to the room, they said, Joe, his father, hadn't made a sound. Susie, his blessed mother, was crying. And if it were not for the risk that his precious Aunt Minnie Walker did, where she continually blew into that little precious black baby's lungs, that finally he made a noise, and his father jumped for joy and walked 9 miles to Gut Bucket, Jim Crow, Barnwell, South Carolina, and named him after himself. Death already at the physiological and biological level, but linked to high levels of infant mortality, and then all of the expectations of what it means to begin life at the most primordial level, knowing there's a fundamental sense in which you were not really meant to be. That's why the first line of his autobiography is what? I was marked from the get up. That's what the first sentence says. What you mean you was marked? Not just racially marked, not just class marked, not just marked as a countrified, rural, niggerized human being, told he's less beautiful, less moral, and less intelligent. He was marked because he wasn't sure that he really belonged here at all. And what did he do? He wrestled with the sense of gratitude, gratefulness, thankfulness for being, just being itself. Think of Eugene O'Neill. His mother told him, I wish you knew. And then given all of the exaltation of his mother 4 years later, she's gone. She said, take him, Joe. You gave him your name, and of course it gets complicated even in terms of name, because Joe's real name was Gardner, but his parents had left him. And there was a black woman who loved him named Mamie Brown, so he took Mamie Brown's place, and he then gave his son Brown, which is the name of the mother, not his real name, Joe Gardner. Namelessness, part and parcel of wrestling with what it means to be human and wrestling with what it means to be a human being of African descent. And here, left in this one-room shack in the pine woods of Barnwell, South Carolina, is a little young, precious black boy named James Brown with his father, just the two of them. And for the first 6 years of his life, his father is gone 16 hours of the day, and he's not in school. He's all by himself. And he says what? I shall never forget that sense of loneliness. All I had was a harmonica. All I could do was play with the animals and hope he would bring home some poke salad and black-eyed peas. All by himself. And what an Emersonian moment it was of self-reliance and self-trust. He said, one thing I learned to fall back on myself. So he became what? A fearless human being, a fearless black man, a bold black man, believing in impossibility even, based on sheer will, sheer decision, sheer commitment. And like so many young black brothers, when his father then drifted and disappeared and was taken then to Augusta, GA, because he's a South Carolinian brother. Now, I know Georgians been claiming him for a long time. He gets to Augusta, GA when he's 7, and that's when he's taken to his aunt's whorehouse. That's where he is called Little Junior. And how ironic that one of the greatest dancers of the 20th century actually had a nickname of Crips because he broke his leg twice and played with casts each time they were broke and still scored touchdowns. People say something is in this little brother. He's on fire. We don't know what he's going to do, but it's clear he's got a calling. How you going to play football with a cast and still score touchdowns? What's going on? That's little James. It's amazing. And yes, it's true, he drops out before 8th grade and ends up like so many young black brothers then and now, tied to a deeply racist criminal justice system. Goes to jail with a crime in no way commensurate, with a conviction no way commensurate with the crime committed. And he's there 3.5 years, and when he leaves, it's a pardon. I know Brother Allen knows the whole story. So good to see you, Brother Allen. Definitely. Chris Rock says hello. Because this brother right here has been the road manager for Prince, James Brown, and Chris Rock. So you know he got a lot going on. We love you, brother. You got to be doing a good job. Because I know Prince don't play. My dear brother Prince don't play to Chris Rock either. But can you imagine the sense of existential loneliness and that sense of being already born in the minor key? almost a blues man before he was introduced to the blues. And who comes to his defense? Human beings based on the same community, tradition, and struggle that he will articulate. Black folk in Augusta. Bobby Bird, his sister Sarah Bird, Sarah and James form a group, the Ever Ready Gospel Choir. I love that, Ever Ready. James believed like Shakespeare, rightness is all. You got to be ready every minute. Be prepared, be disciplined, put on your armor. What kind of stand are you willing to take? That's James Brown. And it goes far beyond politics. This is assertion of humanity. We know the English word human derives from the Latin humando, which means burial, death. And James says, yes, I might be a two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces, whose body will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. But in the time that I'm here, I am going to leave my imprint as a human being of African descent. And that's precisely what he does. But he does it how? The only major option available to him. His voice, his body, and musical instruments. And it's there where he's going to find a home, given his homelessness, and he's going to find a name, given his namelessness. And in a certain sense, he's going to find a whole lot of love, given his relative lovelessness. Yes, he's loved by many. He comes to be loved by Ben Bart, the white brother who actually serves as the major establishmentarian patron that allows James Brown to have the contacts and allows him access to the white-dominated networks. It's impossible to talk about a black man or a black woman ascending through a nation so deeply shaped by a vicious legacy of white supremacy without talking about the black and white alliances that facilitate the emergence of their talent becoming manifest. And the problem usually is not enough white brothers and sisters who are willing to do that. But thank God for those who are willing to do that. And it's no accident that James Brown would call that white brother Ben Bart my father. One of the few times I ever cried was when Ben died, even given the tension that was often there. James Brown, for me, and what he did for me, and the reason why I was so deeply moved, not just by the music on the dance floor, but when I would take my course, take my exam in advanced Hebrew and listen to James Brown for 45 minutes and go in knowing I was going to ace it. It wasn't just because I had studied so hard, but James's music had given me such a sense of self-confidence and self-regard and self-respect and a belief that I could actually do the best that I could be, and the best that I could be could actually go head-to-head and toe-to-toe with anybody else's best. Now, yes, James Cleveland had done that too. My mama too, my daddy too, and a host of others. But James had done it with the funk. Because the Shiloh Baptist Church that I grew up in, we had a holy funk. It was continuous with James's funk, but it was not identical. James was looked on as somebody to hold at arm's length because his funk was dangerous. Now, when James Cleveland brought his funk on the piano, and Aretha showed up, you're going to get some Christian-inflicted funk. That's different in my community at that time. And today it's a little different, but still there's some borders that people are policing. You see. But what James had provided for me was an ability to look birth, given that we all emerge in the beautiful stink and stench of our mother's wombs, the funk in life, what Samuel Beckett called the mess, the fears, the insecurities, the anxieties, the flaws, the defects of every human being, and then the funk of death, our bodies decomposing as the worms take over. Those are not inviting kind of questions. So the question becomes, how do you respond to it? Well, James knew that he comes out of a people and tradition and community that has been wrestling with the catastrophic and the scandalous and the monstrous and the traumatic for 400 years. What is the blues but catastrophe expressed lyrically? What is the jazz but wrestling with the scandalous and monstrous in such a way that you can still emerge with an elegance of earned self-togetherness, with a smile against the backdrop of the darkness of the underside of white supremacist America? Lester Young, where do you get that elegance? Duke, where do you get it? Count, where do you get it? Charlie Parker, where do you get it? Coltrane, where do you get it? I get it by immersing myself in this dangerous freedom and profound love and sublime beauty of the funk of a people who are always viewed as if they're always already marked. And the very fact that this conference is taking place at Princeton requires some comment. It's true. It's true. Princeton's a grand place, and we got a beautiful historical moment, but let's be clear about that. This place was the northernmost post of the Confederacy. That's what Paul Robeson said. Why? Because it was the funk of the black Princetonians right down the way that were held at arm's length for the more deodorized and manicured Princetonian space where they had no access. And now the funk master himself projected on the screen at Princeton. Let's not be dishonest in acknowledging what's going on here. A change is taking place, a fundamental quest for truth. But an acknowledgement when you come to talking about truth in the black context, the claim is that the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, and watch how he transformed the suffering and the moans and groans of a downtrodden people and produces such dignity and elegance. That's the fusion of the tradition of the James Browns, whose very people were just right across the street just a few decades ago and couldn't set foot in this place, that now we have those who are still willing to build on the best of the quest for truth at Princeton and say, you know what? We find the truth in Shakespeare and Milton, yes. We find it in Faulkner, yes. We find it in Toni Morrison. We find it in Marquez, yes. We find it in James Brown and Bob Dylan. We find it in Curtis Mayfield. We find it in Sondheim and Gershwin. Yes, the quest for truth is, in fact, uninhibited. The conversation must go on. That's why ain't that a groove? The genius, the geniality, the large mind and heart and soul and gut bucket funk of James Brown takes place for the first time, given his death on Christmas Day last year here at Princeton University. I know it surprises a lot of people. That's all right. We're going to just keep surprising them. Because we believe in the quest for truth and justice. We believe in the quest for truth and justice. The indigenous peoples, brown, red, gay, lesbian, whatever it is, be ready to be unsettled. We're going to have a serious conversation here. But yes, we're going to be critical too. There's no doubt about that. James Brown could not vote in America until he was 31 years old. Think about that. It's unsettling to me. No wonder he put the Constitution on revolution of the mind, because he lived at a time in which it was hard for him to conceive of that document actually being executed on the ground. And when Martin and Fannie and the others were willing to put their lives on the line, lo and behold, they began to breathe some serious democratic life to that document, which for black people for so long had been a lie. He lived to see that transition. And he couldn't understand these young folks saying, well, you want to cast it aside so quick? I grew up in Jim Crow, South Carolina. I didn't think that Constitution would mean so much. Now I'm seeing black people mayors of cities. My God. You say, well, brother, they certainly becoming mayors right when the city is about to collapse. But you were right. Progress has been made. The progress is real, James. And of course, we'd also want to come back to our brother and say, James, UEP knew the Black Panther Party. They read the Declaration of Independence when they stood in front of the state capitol in my hometown of Sacramento, California. They read the language of Thomas Jefferson that said, you overthrow a government if you've been a people who've been abused one generation over and over and over again. That for them was an affirmation of the revolutionary potential of those documents. But they also knew in practice, U.S. Constitution pro-slavery document for 78 years on the ground. That's what James and the young folk were wrestling with. And that's a very important discussion. I think there's actually truths on both sides of the dialogue. That's the kind of conversation we need to have. That's what James Brown was willing to have. He just took a stand. Yes, he supported Nixon, as did Sammy Davis Jr. Who else supported? Jim Brown supported that year. Who else was part of that line? They had a number of Negroes falling in line. It was a fascinating discussion. What Nixon was talking about black capitalism. Floyd McKissick, black power within the U.S. capitalist system. Come on in. James Brown had one fundamental demand he talks about in his book. Nixon, if I support you, you better promote a national holiday for Martin Luther King Jr. That's the condition. Of course, Nixon didn't have time to follow through to do too much for nothing. And of course, many of us radically disagree with James Brown supporting Nixon. His art is in no way reducible to that particular judgment, but it shows that he was part of the fray. Because if you have the audacity, and maybe I don't know whether I should use that word audacity. I know Brother Obama's colonized that now. And there's a deep difference between mature courage, adolescent bravery, and naive audacity. If you have the courage to still connect your life and art to political engagement, then things are always already messy. You're always going to make certain judgments that you call into question later. I don't say this to justify James Brown. It's like Muhammad Ali, probably one of the other great free black men of the 20th century alongside Richard Pryor. We won't get into the sisters right now, but the black men. It was coming out for Reagan. What you got in mind, brother, from Elijah Muhammad to Reagan? I don't understand that ideological trajectory. Sit down and talk with him. Listen to his argument. See what's plausible, what's not. What's persuasive, what's not. Call it into question. And that's precisely what we've tried to do here with James Brown on so many different levels. And I hope and pray, in fact, that the proceedings will be made publicly available, because there's a hunger not just here but around the world. That right now the American empire is in such crisis that people are concerned about those voices in America that are willing to talk about truth and justice in ways that are not just aesthetically pleasing but also intellectually unsettling, as I said before. I know when I was in Cuba, I got in trouble because I was there 27 years ago and they had a ban against American music, so we had to go underground and listen to James. And I went to the Castro's elite, and I told them, I said, you know, something is wrong if a country doesn't allow my dearly beloved James Brown's music to be heard on every corner. Now, I might be in solidarity with you on certain issues and can't stand any regime that rejects rights and liberties, but I'm going to play some James Brown. You're just going to have to put me in jail. That's going to be embarrassing since you helped bring me here. But that's just a question of being what? True to oneself. His artistic integrity, his spiritual magnanimity, his commitment to human dignity is such that it became so contagious that I and so many of you could pick it up and try to find our own vocation, our own voice, and our own vision. I must say, and I'll say this in conclusion, one of the highest compliments I have ever received in my life was when Democracy Matters appeared and I was lecturing in Seattle and I was meeting with Brother Eddie, a veteran of Pearl Jam, there in Seattle. And I look in the newspaper and it says, Ivy League Soul Brother #1 coming to lecture at Seattle. I said to myself, I have not lived in vain. Because soul is the sharing of soothing sweetness against catastrophic circumstances. It empowers, it ennobles, it enables people. And if intellectual work can be 1/3 as healing, enabling, empowering as James's music, we'd have intellectual giants contributing to the transformation of black America and the country as a whole, renaissance of black self-respect and black self-regard. A renaissance of democratic ideals in which we actually bring critique to bear on corporate elites and wealth inequality and disgraceful school systems and unavailable health and child care, not enough jobs with a living wage, and bashing gay brothers and lesbian sisters and not keeping track of the humanity of the disabled and the elderly right across the board. It would shatter indifference. Because anybody who hears James Brown's music, soul music, funk in general, and is still indifferent. William James said indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. Indifference is the essence of inhumanity. How do you shake the indifference and get people to become decent subjects in the world and compassionate agents in the world? James Brown responded to that question by giving us his art and his life. And we thank you so much, Daphne, for allowing us to have a conversation on this, dear brother. Thank you all so very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.